Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to our Monday, February 19th school board meeting, and we'll start with our agenda approval, deletions, additions. Dr. Baracco.
Thank you, Mrs. Suze. You do have a revised agenda before you. Roman numeral 7C, 1 additional professional leave requests under Dr. Bracy's. 7D, 1 and 2 additional professional leave requests and field trips under Mrs. Schoeneman. And 7G3, Rob is going to do a short presentation on TIF districts in response to an email from last week.
Move to approve the revised agenda.
We have a motion by Dr. Medlin. Second by Dr. Malco. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Is there any correspondence, Mrs. Kelly?
There is not, Mrs. Hughes.
All right, we'll run into our liaison committee updates.
Sure.
Mr. Marshall.
You need it. I'm sorry.
We're on our liaison committee updates.
Oh, you jumped to that
I
quickly.
did.
Nothing to report this evening, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kelly.
I also have nothing to report this evening.
Dr. Medlin.
The Wellness Committee, they have a step challenge that started beginning of February, goes to the end of the month, and currently Lake Central High School is in the lead with central office and transportation at the tail end of the group. But everybody is averaging over 8,000 steps a day, which is pretty amazing. And Lake Central High School is averaging over 10,000 steps a day, so
Oh.
they have a nice thing going on.
Good.
So that is all.
Thank you. Dr. Malco.
Lake Central Education Foundation had a meeting the other night, and of course, their primary focus right now is raising money. So we talked about fundraising and also someone who would be interested in that part-time position to help with the bookkeeping challenges that come with all that type of work. Legislative, I think Larry's got a report on that in a bit, so I'll defer that to him. And the Dyer Parks just doing their thing and keeping everything up to date for us. There was that one item that Miss Jenna, I don't know her last name, Agrosevich, maybe, and did that get out to all the community members?
Yes, we shared that with all the principals, and so
Oh.
they're going to talk to their different groups and see if anyone's interested in facilitating that.
Appreciate that, thank you so much.
That's all.
And for my committees, the construction committee, our next meeting is March 5th. I don't have anything for the redevelopment commission, and Dollars for Scholars scholarships close March 10th. Seniors, get those applications in. And with that, we'll move to our official school board business topics consent agenda. Dr. Baracco.
Thank you again. Seek board approval for the minutes from our last meeting on February 5th. Also seek board approval for the claims, payroll, and extracurricular expenditures that you received last week in your packets.
Motion to approve?
Motion by Mrs. Kelly. I will second that. Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. There is no public comments regarding action items, so our official school board business topics regular agenda. Dr. Baracco.
Thank you again. I want to update the board on some important legislation that we continue to follow. Of course, number one on my list continues to be Senate Bill 1, the literacy bill, also to some people being referred to as the retention bill. The retention is the part of the bill that most of us are concerned about. So we have continued to have these conversations with our state officials about this legislation. We continue to hear some pretty standard talking points, mainly around something needs to be done in light of the fact that 19% of our students on last year's iRead 3 did not make the cut score. We do agree, I think it's important, well, I should say I do agree. I don't want to say that everybody on our team agrees with all of it, but I do agree with the components regarding intentional interventions, utilizing the science of reading, which Dr. Bracy has talked about many times this year already and will continue to talk about. I totally agree with tracking the interventions we do for students. We have already agreed to administer the test in grade 2 to figure out who could potentially need some extra support in grade 3. We also agree with the reimbursement on a priority basis. Remember, the summer school allotment never covers all of summer school. and they're talking but have not given any firm information on making the summer reading course high priority, which sounds to me like we'll get reimbursed 100% for that, and then they'll divide up whatever's left for the other courses that we offer. And we agree with that because we do think it's more important than us being reimbursed for some courses that students could take during the school year if they needed to. Retaining some students continues to be a big concern. Students who barely miss the cut score. How do we even know for sure that the cut score is set in the right place? So if you barely miss it, we don't know that you need to be retained. Students who have only been in our country for 24 months. I've spoken to some literacy experts, including someone from East Chicago who said it probably takes, for written language, closer to 7 years to be able to get where you need to be, especially if the native language is still being spoken in the home. Students who show significant progress from grade 2 to grade 3, or from grade 3 to the summer retest in grade 3, if they show significant progress and they're close to passing, we don't think they should be retained. Students who skipped kindergarten have only had, one less year of formal education. We think that needs to be a consideration. Students who suffer a significant traumatic life event leading up to the test. We think we can't just ignore that certain things happen and using a one-day test or a two-day test for deciding whether a student who otherwise gets all A's or all B's and is successful in school should be retained because they didn't do what they needed to do on that one day. So we're still hoping to get through and get some additional contingencies in place to cover this. LCTA members were down last week on the 13th. They met with both Representative Slager and Senator Durnall on this bill. Senator Durnall did acknowledge that an amendment to protect an otherwise successful student who barely misses the cut score could be appropriate. So he is understanding our concern that if someone's doing everything else they need to do and they're not scoring way low, then maybe they should not be retained. Maybe because some people aren't great test takers either, or they have anxiety because of it. The good cause exemptions in the current language as of today only cover immigrants here for less than 24 months, students who pass iLearn Math. It puzzles me why if you pass iLearn English Language Arts, you don't get to be waived through. Students who have already been retained at least once, and students with IEPs. So it's a pretty short list on what they're currently considering good cause exemptions. If it stays that way, there will be massive retentions of third graders, not in this fall, but next summer. Secretary Jenner, on the 15th, when I was down there after the literacy celebration, she shared that she believes that third graders move forward who don't pass the test is way more damaging than the social emotional damage brought on through being retained. And I challenged her on that and said, what about a student who barely misses? Do they really need to be retained? And I went through some of the other scenarios. What about the student who in second grade missed it by quite a bit and in third grade barely missed? Is it really beneficial to hold them back? So I didn't get any answers on that. Just, again, that something needs to be done. And so, again, I'll just sum it up by saying most educators who I speak to are looking for a little more thoroughness in what would be the exceptions to that retention, because our parents surely are going to look at it with a more discerning viewpoint, and they're going to expect to have some input, not just some state law that they tell us as the school you have to enforce it. If it doesn't make sense to them, they're not going to be happy. And so that's the message we're trying to get through to our elected officials and our Secretary of Education. Any questions about that item before I move on to the referendum piece? All right, we'll continue to follow that and continue to fight for students, because I think there is a place for retention. I just don't think it should be anywhere near the first choice that we make with students who are struggling to read. So House Bill 1376 requires construction referendum to be on the ballot in the fall only. I guess our biggest concern is that if you eliminate the off years, that means a lot more schools will be going at the same time for construction projects. And if they're successful, that means a lot more people are going at the same time for bids. And when contractors, construction companies get more requests for proposal, requests for quotes, their prices can sometimes creep up. I would think the construction industry would rather have a more level amount of work, and I would expect that not just schools, but the construction industry would be opposed to this legislation. And I'd also add, just for anybody who's listening, anyone who's run a construction referendum knows that it's a heavy lift to talk your community into supporting new construction, either because you need the capacity or because you have some failing infrastructure at an old building. So they're hard to win, and people who have a strong feeling one way or the other, I do believe show up and vote when that thing is on the ballot. The argument from some legislators is a lot of people avoid the spring election season, so that's their main motivation. But I think spreading out the projects would put more money into the facilities and less into imported labor or overtime labor. So we still hope that that thing stays the way it currently is. And my last piece to update, this one just got on my radar last week, and that's 1380. The first part of the language says that the Secretary of Education by November 1st of 2024 will create a pilot program that provides innovative approaches towards the use of school facilities to promote enhanced learning environments, unique learning opportunities, and improve student academic and health outcomes. It's really vague language. I'm not sure exactly where that's going, but the second part, or the section 33 of this legislation, talks about not later than November 1st, 2024, the Secretary of Education shall submit to the General Assembly a plan to establish a pilot program that encompasses innovative approaches for increasing transportation of students enrolled at charter schools and non-public schools. And so that piece caught my attention because it sounds like they want the public school system to transport students to more schools than their own. I understand that would be nice, but I also understand that we can barely have enough employees to get our kids to school. We have many days, and some of our parents who are listening might know and say, yeah, how come you haven't fixed that yet? That sometimes we have to turn 3 routes into 2, which means the driver's picking up a route and a half worth of kids, and that route goes to an hour and 5 minutes when it's normally 35 or 40 minutes. And so the lengthening of routes would be the least of our concerns. We have a serious worker shortage right now, and so we're going to follow this piece close too, because this could be a rather heavy lift. And if you try to think about taking students to one private school on the corner of the district, and you have to collect students from all around the district, that could be a rather lengthy route too, or you'd have to come up with a system of exchanges or something. So yeah, we're going to follow HB 1380 closely here as we move forward.
I do have a question. I'm sorry, it goes back to Senate Bill 1, the literacy. It talks in here about students who barely miss the cut score. Is the cut score being determined by the Department of Education, by a group of teachers, or is it already established by the publisher, or do you know?
The cut score, as far as I can remember, has been the same since day one. It's always been 446, I believe, and it goes up to 600. So if you don't make that 446, you don't pass the test. And I really don't know where it started, but that has been the cut score as far as I can remember.
So that evidently has just been part of the plan. And how long have we been doing iRead? Is it 4 years, 5?
Oh, no. It's been a long
At least a
time.
decade.
Oh, yeah.
Or at least a decade?
Oh, yes.
Oh. Okay, so it's just always been part of it.
Correct.
Do you think, in your experience with it, that the cut score is where it needs to be?
I guess it depends on the child. I can't answer that question, but I do agree with Dr. Baracco that, you know, if a child does not pass, we should not retain them. We should be able to provide a plan of what we're going to do to make sure that child makes growth, makes
Right.
progress, but they should not be retained.
Right. But, and you're going to administer this test in second grade versus,
We started that last year.
Yeah,
This
that's
will be
what I
our
thought.
second year, yes.
do you have middle of the year data on the students?
I do. I can share it with you again.
Cool, that'd be
Mhm.
great.
Well, middle of the year for iRead, you mean?
Mhm.
Well, they took it last year. They take it in March every year, so I've shared that with you, but I can share it with you again.
No, the other the middle of the year, I don't know if it's iRead or
Oh, for
whatever.
iReady?
Yeah,
That's
iReady.
different. Oh,
Yeah.
iReady, I can share that with you.
Yeah, iReady, that's one. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Baracco, for meeting with those legislators. It's pretty important to do that, so thanks. And our Assistant Superintendent, Mrs. Castaneda.
Thank you. I only have one item this evening. I am seeking your approval for the personnel recommendations.
Motion to approve?
Motion by Mrs. Kelly,
Second?
second by Mr. Marshall. Any discussion or questions?
Was there a revised one sent out, or is it the one that you sent to us?
The one that was in the packet.
Okay, all right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Our Director of Primary Education, Dr. Bracy.
Hi, I am seeking approval for the professional leave request you've been provided with in your packets.
Move to approve?
Motion by Mr. Marshall,
Second.
second by Dr. Malco. Any questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And I am also seeking approval for the field trip requests in your packets.
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Malco, and a second by Mr. Marshall. Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Our Director of Secondary Education, Mrs. Schooneman.
Thank you. For my first item, I'm seeking the board's approval for the professional leave requests that are included in your packet.
Move to approve the professional leave requests?
Motion by Dr. Medlin.
I'll second that.
Second by Mrs. Kelly. Any discussion, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And for my second item, I'm seeking your approval for the field trip requests also included in the packet.
Move to approve?
Motion by Dr. Malco, and I will second that. Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. And our Director of Student Services, Mrs. Grimala.
Thank you. My first item is to seek approval for the professional leave request. There is one small change. Michelle Kudemeyer, her PL for the LAMP training, there actually will be no charge for it. We're hosting the training at Clark, and we get a certain number of free seats. So she will still be out of the classroom that day, but there will be no charge.
Motion
So
to
moved.
approve?
Oh,
We have a motion by Mrs. Kelly and a second by Dr. Malco.
And when is that training?
The LAMP training is on March 12th.
And that is located where?
It will be at Clark in the LGI.
Okay. Just curious.
All in favor?
what that's all-
Aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. For my next item, I do have a presentation on our special education data, so I'm going to turn on the projector. It was included in your packets also. So this is just my annual update on all things special education here in Lake Central. Oh, turn that on. So the first information I'm going to share is on our special education funding. So just as a reminder, our funding, these are our additional pupil count dollars. It's based on our student count and then the type of disability that the student is eligible with. So we do this on or around December 1st every year. This year it actually was December 1st. So our APC funding is based on the student count, and it also, our count contributes to our census data for our Part B grants, which are federal special education grants. So our total amount for this year is on the projector, and that did go up about $612,000 from last year. So we always like it when that number goes up. And this kind of shows you why it went up. So we have, our state legislature has increased our funding for each of our eligibility areas. So the change per student is listed there. Our students are divided into groups. So based on their eligibility area, Group 1 funding, Group 2, Group 3. and then our preschool students. Our Group 3 students are the only group that could be counted twice. So if they have a language or speech impairment, we get that $525. If they have any of those other disabilities in Group 1 or 2, we also still get that $525 if they also have language and speech. So you will see we had some pretty big jumps in our numbers of students in some of those areas. We are forever grateful to any increased funding, but I do want to point out, as Dr. Veracco is always talking about, the true cost of educating our students. While this is an increase, it still doesn't come anywhere close to what we need to educate most of our students. So if you think about a student who's deaf and hard of hearing, who might have a sign language interpreter, we probably need triple that per student amount that's listed up there. The $525 we have for our speech and language services, if we estimated a large SLP caseload of 80 students, we would still fall almost $30,000 short on paying the salary for an SLP. So again, forever grateful for increased funding, but still always room for improvement. So you'll see we had a large jump in our Group 1 students those are our neediest students in the district, the students who typically require the most services. We had a big jump there. We had a slight decrease in our preschool category, which is interesting, and a pretty large increase in our speech and language students also. This is our historical growth since I became director. So we have increased a lot, and in a year where we saw a decrease in our overall enrollment, we still saw a pretty hefty increase in our number of students with special needs. So just something to bear in mind as we look at staffing numbers and things like that. While our enrollment is down, we're still growing in this particular area, and obviously the highest number we've had. So then the next information I wanted to share is our results-driven accountability. So every year we are evaluated by the Department of Ed on how we are doing meeting the needs of our students with disabilities. So our overall rating this year was meets requirements, which is the highest rating we can have. Our data reporting score was a 100, so that is thanks to Teresa Scherzinger, who makes sure that everything comes out of Skyward when it needs to and that it gets submitted on time. Our compliance score this year was a 100, which that's the first time that's happened since I've been director. We've really been working with our evaluation staff, so I owe them a big thank you for prioritizing those evaluation timelines and making sure that we are doing everything we need to do. So the next area we are evaluated on is our actual results. And I'm going to show you some more on the next slide. While we still are in the meets requirement range, which means we are in the top performing districts our size, there's still room for us to grow, obviously. So there are some areas of concern that I'll explain here. So these are the areas we are evaluated on for our RDA. Get to the page of my notes. So we did have, where's my pointer? How to make it point? Oh, there we go. Okay. So one area here that we just talked about is IREAD 3. So while a 5 is the highest score, so the percentage here is our actual performance, and then the number underneath is our ranking. So a 5 is the highest score we can get, a 1 is the lowest. So on IREAD 3, we still have a score of 5, which is great, but we did see a big decrease from last year. However, our second graders were factored into this year. So if you were to look at last year's presentation, you would see that this number was 85%. So we dropped to 70, but we also added another grade level of students and students who we know aren't really ready, and we don't expect them to meet that criteria yet. This group, our third graders this year, are also the students, our third graders last year were the students who were in kindergarten and first grade during our COVID years. So the 1920 school year would have been their kindergarten year, and 2021 their first grade year. So also not a surprise that that is a group that's really struggling meeting those reading standards. So that same information would sort of apply to our English language arts scores here. And let's see, what else did I have? We did have a drop in our graduation rate for students with disabilities. However, the state introduced the alternate diploma for students with disabilities last year, and any student who doesn't earn a general diploma or what the state considers higher counts against us in our graduation rate. So we do not get credit for those students graduating, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But that does factor into our graduation rate. Because last year was the first year with that diploma, we had an exceptionally large group of students. I do think that will even out now that it's just available on an ongoing basis. But last year we gave it to a lot of our TAP students and our graduating seniors, so that should even out. The numbers that we tend to have difficulty with every year are this alternate assessment number and our students in LRE. And so for both of these categories, if you do not meet what the state sets as the target, you automatically get a 1. So it's either a 1 or a 5 on this. So our alternate assessment, this is the percentage of students who take our alternate assessment. The state tells us we should have no more than 1% of students taking it. That is a number they've decided on. It does not take into account our own population. So when we just looked at our funding numbers, that group 1, which is we had a huge increase in, those are our students who would most likely be on this alternate assessment. So we continue to see growth in our district with that population of students. Parents tell us they move here when they have students who might need those types of services because of our reputation. So I never get upset about this number because I feel very confident that we are making the right decisions for our students. And we're at 1.6%. We're right there. It's like 1 or 2 kids beyond their target that they set for us. So just I wanted to explain why that is there. And then our LRE placement, again, this is one where the state sets a target. They believe that over 75% of our students should be spending 50% of their time in, or be an LRE code of 50, which is 80% of their time in general ed. Again, that's a number they've decided on, and you either get a 1 or a 5 on this. We have a population of students, like I've talked about, who tend to need a higher level of service, and we've made great progress in this. It was down around 64% when I became director. So we have moved. We've created a lot more inclusive opportunities for our students. But because we are not at their target, they give us a 1. So similar to the alternative assessment, I believe very confidently that we're making good choices for students. Our students have a lot of opportunities here that they don't have in surrounding districts. So we continue to try to improve that, but we probably aren't going to get to where the state thinks we need to be. It would be very nice if both of those scores took into consideration the number of students you have in that population, your overall enrollment. Instead, it's just, here's the percentage of your total students, and it doesn't really factor in the individual needs. So just like the state doesn't count some of our students as graduates when they have diplomas, they also don't rate us on our IM proficiency data, which bothers me, and I wanted to share it. So IM is that alternative assessment that I talk about. So our students, even with the most significant disabilities, are participating in academic instruction and academic assessment every year. So they all take the IM, which measures their progress on the content connectors, which are the modified academic standards. And I am thrilled with these results. So we give this assessment in 3rd through 8th and 11th grade. And this is the number of our students who are at approaching proficiency or higher for math and for English language arts. And I really think we need to celebrate the success of our teachers who are working with these students. These are our students with the greatest academic challenges. And to see these types of proficiency numbers for those students, I think is really exciting. And it's pretty disappointing that the state doesn't give us some credit for that. So I don't know how, they don't give us any sort of comparison with other districts. I don't know where this lines up with other districts, but knowing the students who are taking these assessments, I'm really proud of what the teachers have done with them. So I wanted to share that too. Any questions?
So that's a percentage of students that meet proficiency. And I think back on the previous slide, there was a slide on math right there.
Yes, so that is our growth score for our students. So it's our iLearn growth score in math. So we have, that is a little bit of a difficult number to look at, a ranking of 2 on that. We do know our students with disabilities, as our math has shifted into language-heavy problem-solving, more conceptual and abstract tasks, it's been very difficult for our students with disabilities. We have at the elementary level, we implemented a different curriculum this year. So our resource teachers are still using the main general ed curriculum, but they have some additional activities to supplement what's happening and to provide maybe more concrete examples for our students who are struggling with that abstract math. So we're hearing good things from the teachers on that. We're really excited about everything at the elementary level that Yolanda is doing with the Science of Reading and her Fab 4. And they've made a really big effort to work with our elementary teachers also.
Good.
Deanne McDermott, our literacy coach, came and met with all my speech language pathologists last week to talk to them about the science of reading, because so much of what they do supports that. So we're implementing a lot, and I think we'll see some improvements. And the science of reading, it makes a lot of sense, and it really lines up with what we've done in special education for a long time. So it will be nice to have that earlier on for students, and students getting that in the general ed classroom and in the special ed classroom.
Very true.
So,
Very good, thank you.
thank you. That's nice, Becky.
Is your special ed group talking to legislators about your concerns?
Always, yes,
Oh, cool.
always. There's been multiple bills this year related to special education that we've been pretty active on, and we're
Good.
continuing to work on it.
But even just to bring up the faux pas in this data that you just shared with us.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. I mean, the alternative assessment cap has been
Yeah.
something that's been discussed and
Forever.
debated forever. They get public comment on it every year, but they never change the number. And I know that everyone, at least in special ed, who's submitting public comment, is saying this doesn't make sense.
No, an arbitrary number.
Right. But they
Right.
still don't change it, so we'll
Well,
keep trying.
And you're not alone, because when I worked in Illinois, we had the same problem over there,
Mhm.
the percentage. Maybe it comes from the feds.
I believe it is partially in the federal, and usually when it's set in federal statute, you can go beyond it, but you can't lower the standard. So they probably can't, unless it's changed at the federal level, they don't know that they have much room. But we can still bulk about it.
There you go, there you go.
All right, thank you. And I understand that Mr. James will be covering Mr. Ledger's portion this evening, so,
Thank you.
Mr. James.
So Mr. Ledger has 3 change orders for the board to approve this evening. The first is to award and execute change order number 4 to Gluth Brothers Roofing for the Bibbich Elementary School project. This is for an ad in the amount of $4,105, and this is to replace some existing panels where the new building addition meets the existing building. So I seek your approval on that.
Move to approve change order number 4.
Motion by Dr. Medlin,
I'll second. Oh, sorry.
second by Mr. Marshall.
Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The next item is to award and execute change order number 1 to Circle R Mechanical for the Bibbich Mechanical Project. And this is an ad for the amount of $5,359.09. And this is adding some ductwork and diffusers in the timeout rooms in the existing building that were not part of the original drawings. So seek your approval on that. And I will add that all of these 3 change orders are coming out of the contingency that was built into the contract.
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Malco. I will second that. Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And the third item was to award and execute change order number 1 to Arctic Engineering for the Freshman Center HVAC renovation project. And this is an ad in the amount of $98,800. And this is to replace and relocate a old 20-year-old hot water heater tank that is in bad shape and it's rusting out. And in order to, one, we need to replace it, but then it also needs to be moved to an alternate location because of where the new HVAC system is going to be run. This would also come out of the contingency, so we seek your approval for that.
Move to approve.
Motion by Mr. Marshall,
I'll second.
second by Mrs. Kelly. Questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Mr. James, just in general, is the contingency plan in good shape?
Yes, there's, yes, we, as you can see, bless you. This is only change order number 4 for Gluth, and it's only the first change order to Circle R, and then for Arctic here. So, yes, both projects have their contingencies are healthy, as you can tell by the low amount of change orders that are here. So, yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, we'll just move right.
Okay, and I'll put my
to
other
Mr.
hat on.
James. Yeah.
So under my section, the first item is to seek your approval for the donations that were listed in the board packet.
Motion to approve?
Motion by Mrs. Kelly,
Second.
second by Dr. Malco. Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. In December, all school districts across the state were awarded what the state legislature has called an Early Literacy Achievement Grant. And this was part of the budget that was passed in the spring. And it really must have been pretty quiet because not too much was known about this until December. But this is all tied to the infamous I Read 3 reading scores. And so the state mandates that the amount paid is to provide supplemental payments, in essence, a stipend to teachers and other staff members for improving the students' foundational reading skills as evidenced by the I Read 3 results. So depending on how our students did on the test last year during the 22-23 school year and based on our population and so forth, determined how much our school district was going to get, and that was the formula for how each school district was to get. The other caveats that the state put in is that the only people eligible for it would be teachers, instructional coaches, and other staff who were responsible for the implementation and delivery of literacy and reading instruction through grade 3 during the 22-23 school year and still maintain employment with the corporation now. So as you can see, they're really focusing on the foundation of those reading skills, and that's why they want that directive to be that way. So in your board packet is a resolution on how we are going to distribute those funds as required by the state. And so through working with our administrative team and our principals, we are going to distribute the grant funds to not only our pre-K through grade 3 classroom teachers, but also to our ELL teachers, reading specialists, reading interventionists, speech language pathologists, speech language pathology assistants, and the library clerks. That amount was calculated to a gross pay amount of $454.46. And then we're also going to give a stipend amount to our elementary paraprofessionals and Title I tutors who work with those elementary kids as well. And those paraprofessionals will receive an amount of $225 of gross pay. We intend to pay that out on this Friday on a separate pay to them. So that's the history behind it. And so I seek your approval for the resolution that was included in your board packet that approves that procedure.
Move to approve the ELA grant distribution.
We have a motion by Dr. Medlin,
Second.
second by Dr. Malco. Any questions or discussion?
Right. Mr. James, so the way I understood you explain it, it's a different amount for every school corporation?
That's correct.
Okay. And then each school corporation has the autonomy to decide how they're going to disperse it?
Yes, as long as it's within those caveats. So it has to be, again, grades up through grade 3 only, has to be the emphasis on the literacy and reading. So unfortunately, by state rule, in essence, our 4th grade teachers unfortunately are not going to be allowed. But talking with our teams, we know how much importance like those paraprofessionals, aides work with those kids every single day. And well, we want to be able to give some of that money to them as well, as long as some of those other people who are helping support those kids on a daily basis.
Well, and I think it's really, really great that you did include the parapros. I think that's it's just a good, generous move, and it shows their value, that you value them, I should say, that we value them.
Yep.
Okay. And then this was, I suppose, discussed with union leadership?
It was brought.
Guidelines?
Yeah, state was actually pretty straightforward, is that it was not negotiable. It was a corporation decision. However, it was talked with the union actually today at our discussion process, because we just wanted to fill them in on the process, and it wasn't a surprise to them.
Makes sense.
So,
Thank you.
okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
All right, based on some discussions last week, I just kind of want to do a little quick overview on TIF districts, and not only just TIF districts in general, but more specifically how TIF districts in St. John's, Cherville, and Dyer affect us as Lake Central, because each school district is different, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So the first 6 or 8 pages here are slides that we have talked about 2 or 3 times here to this group, so I'm not going to go through all those, but I just want to include them so you can have them as a reference. But if you go about 4 or 5 pages in, where there's a nice little more of an animated drawing, just to refresh how a TIF district works, is there is currently an area that might be underdeveloped or not much there, and there are existing tax payments that are coming in through the property taxes, and those property tax dollars go not only to the city, but to the county and to the libraries and to schools. Well, then the redevelopment commission would create what's called a TIF district, or a TIF allocation area. And then the redevelopment commission sells bonds, and they take that bond money and they put in infrastructure, the sewers, the roads, and so forth, in order to stimulate development there. And then the new development comes in, there's new buildings, new commercial development, and then those new industries pay property taxes. But instead of those property taxes being distributed to all the governmental units, instead those new tax dollars go to the redevelopment commission solely, and they use that money to pay the bonds that they issued in order to pay for that infrastructure, and then also to use it for potential further infrastructure needs in the district. So what happens is that if you look on the page, it looks like this. That additional assessed value is incrementally added to the tax base, and means that we have a higher assessed value for all the properties in our district. And so, in essence, when your AV is higher and you have a need, then that affects what your tax rate is going to be. So the general thought process for many years was that, wow, this is money that is not part of our assessed value, that is going, those tax dollars are going only to the town, that's not coming our way, and schools are kind of being shorted. And that was the case for a long time. But then the rules kind of changed. So on the next page, I just have a quick little overview of prior to 2019, how school funding worked in our various funds. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but before we used to have 3 separate funds: a capital projects fund, a transportation fund, and a bus replacement fund. The funding worked different and how that for each one of them. The main focus I want to talk about here is the old capital projects fund. And previously, until 2019, there was literally a 7-step formula in Indiana code that determined what your tax rate was going to be for that fund. And that 7-step formula was based on what the assessed value was of all your properties. So in this scenario, the higher your assessed value was, the higher rate it would generate. And when you take that rate and add it to the or multiply into the AV, you would generate more dollars. Well, so the argument would have been, if these values that are in the TIF district, where you had a higher assessed value, then we get more money. But then things changed in 2019. In 2019, all 3 funds were then all combined into one, and that is our operations fund. And so here I show that our education fund, the AV has no impact on that because it's just, there's no local property taxes on that. Our debt service funds are based on what our debt payments need to be. And so we are going to get, in essence, the levy we are going to get that amount from our taxpayers to pay our debt, and regardless of what the AV is, the AV will determine the rate. But we're not going to be shorted any revenue there. But in the operations fund, approximately 70% of that money comes from property taxes, 23% is from our monthly transfer of state tuition to that fund, and about 7% comes from miscellaneous revenue. So starting in 2019, though, the levy is what, again, we ask our taxpayers to pay for the revenue into this fund. That amount gets increased each year by what's called the MLGQ, the maximum levy growth quotient. This is a formula from the state, and it applies statewide to all taxing districts for their cumulative funds. It's usually about 3 or 4% a year, and it's based on rates from like 2 years behind, and it's a 5-year running average of how values of property have gone. So if I got $1 million this year in operations, I'm going to get 3% higher next year. And then the year after that, I'm going to get another 3% on top of that. Again, the AV doesn't necessarily affect how much we're going to get into that fund. So up until this point, we're still going to levy that high amount. So we're no longer being shorted any money that would be going through the redevelopment, through the TIF districts. Where it could be a problem, though, and where we are fortunate, is that many of our neighbors, not only here in the county but statewide, have very significant losses to circuit breaker and the tax caps. And when you have this is where people could be helped by having a higher assessed value. So really, it would only change our rate. So on the next page, I kind of show a little bit of a breakdown of the taxing units that make up the Lake Central School Corporation. So we have St. John Township, the unincorporated part. There's the piece of Griffith that is in St. John Township, then Dyer, St. John, and Cherville. There is another portion of St. John Township that is unincorporated, but it does have St. John Water. And then there's the Crown Point area also in the township. The full assessed value of all of those properties is about $6.3 billion. But when you take the AV amount, it's down to about 5.7. So you can see about $600,000 of the $600 million, of the assessed value township-wide is within a TIF district. So in the middle of the page, you will see this is our current breakdown of our 2024 tax rates that will be part of the tax bill going out here in April. And right now, our rate is for this year just over 80 cents. But you can see there in the middle that our referendum operating fund and our referendum debt service fund, those are based on the high assessed value already. We're getting that full amount. So when our operating referendum for our 17 cents, it's going against that high number anyway. So we're all square and good there. We already talked about the debt funds and then our operations fund. So if hypothetically, if there were no TIF districts and all that AV was here as part of our tax roll, all it would really do was decrease our tax rate by about 4 cents. And that's great. I'm not trying to minimize that, but our tax rate fluctuates 3 to 4 cents every year anyway. And so it really wouldn't make a difference here too much. So having a lower tax rate could mean that less taxpayers hit the tax cap, and then all areas of local government wouldn't lose as much money. But that's not always the case. And then the question is, well, if it wasn't a TIF district, would that development even been there? And it still may be at the lower level anyway. So I just quickly want to show, now this is the 2023 tax rates. The 2024s aren't out yet for the tax bills, but once those come out, I will talk to the board about that in the spring. But here you can see highlighted in blue of what the tax rates are for Dyer, St. John, and Cherville. But recall that approximately 40% of our tax rates were those referendum-approved items, which means they're outside of the circuit breaker calculation because they were taxpayer-approved. So really, you can see there I hand wrote on the right what the tax rate is that is applied to the circuit breaker credits for people in our communities. And we've consistently learned from Dr. DeBoer and other economists across the state that you really don't see too much circuit breaker impact unless your tax rate is over $2, the all-in rate. And you can see here in St. John and Schererville, we're less than $1.70 that's applied to the rate, which hence means we have a low circuit breaker impact. The impact that we do have is because the Dyer rate is about $2.20. And then finally, I just want to show to you what that circuit breaker impact is to us here at Lake Central. In 2023, again, the new 24 rates are not out. And our circuit breaker loss was just under $300,000 for the year. And $300,000 is a lot of money. But if you look, that's about 0.5% of our total levy. And it's been around this amount for a long time. Where you look at, see some of our peers, neighboring school districts, they're losing not only the dollar amount, but the percentage on the right. Half the school districts in the county are losing over 10% of their revenue that they asked their taxpayers for just because of the circuit breaker. That's no fault of the school district. That's no fault of the municipalities. That's just because of people hitting the tax cap. So where I'm kind of going with all this, we talked about earlier how our rates, our funds specifically, aren't affected too much by the TIF. And because of our low circuit breaker, that's not really affecting us here as well. But if I'm at some of our neighbors here, yes, it is an issue. So we will always be concerned for our peers and to, fight for the cause of where things can be impacted. One of the things that came up a year or two ago were residential TIFs, which is now the big thing, where it used to just be mainly commercial development and economic development. Well, now municipalities can TIF an entire new subdivision. And that can cause problems for a district that's already at the tax cap, because if you're having multiple subdivisions go in and you're not going to get that tax revenue, well, then you may have to issue debt and to build a new facility. And if you're issuing new debt and you're already against a circuit breaker, you might not get the full amount. So it can be problematic. I mean, you look at some of our neighboring school districts, Hanover's still building crazy, Crown Point's still building. And then, statewide, some of my peers are really facing a situation where they have growth that they can't even keep up with logistically, let alone having the financial piece. So it's always a concern. These are how all the rules are set up now. Of course, laws can change anytime, and but we're fortunate that because of our assessed value that we have minimal circuit breaker loss. So when it comes to, we want to follow what our 3 municipalities are doing, but I just want the board to know that as the way the current rules are, we're not really losing too much here at the Lake Central. So I know that's a lot of information on a bland topic. No. You can watch the tape. So,
Mr. James, I appreciate you clarifying.
no problem.
that again.
And again, that's just us. Any neighboring could have neighbor school district could have a completely different situation, but any other questions?
So Rob, why would Dyer be higher? Just because they need more tax money over there? Is that why they're in the circuit breaker rate is over the 2% that you mentioned?
Well, they've had, so the difference between these really just has to do with the town itself, because the same school tax rate is applied to all 3, the county rate, so forth. I think, and I'm not in their town of Dyer finances, but they've done a lot of park bonds, I believe, with the new park on Calumet. And so they may have some higher debt because of some redevelopment things that they've been doing in the town where the other two municipalities may not have had to. And it also has to go with what their assessed value is. Their assessed value is half of what Sherrill's is. So to have the same need to raise the same dollar amounts, they're going to need a higher rate for it. And that's unfortunately why you see some of our other towns or cities in the county, we're here at the at the bottom, which we talk about as a great reason to be in Tri-Town. And in my spring presentation, I'll say like, well, if you're our same $200,000-$300,000 home here in Tri-Town, if that same home was put in one of our other neighboring communities, that exact home would have a higher tax rate or tax bill compared to, when you look at, and this is no knock on these districts, but when you look at like Gary, East Chicago, Lake Station, their tax rates are, Gary 9.5, East Chicago and Lake Station each over 5. It's not that they just have exorbitant buildings or anything. It's just that their assessed value is so low in those areas that when you divide their need into it, it's just a math issue. So we're fortunate to have the tax base that we do here. So.
Well, and if you look at Crown Point at 3.6 million loss, is that why when they go for the referendum, they have more need to collect more money?
Well, having a higher referendum rate sure helps because it brings in, because you're getting it against the whole AV. And so, yeah, their referendum rate is higher than ours. So it does bring in additional dollars, but they may, again, I don't want to speculate on theirs, but they may have some older homes that hit that tax cap, and therefore their circuit breaker loss is more. Now, with their redevelopment and not redevelopment, but with the amount of building that has been going across that whole South County, maybe their assessed value will go up, and then their circuit breaker loss will be less. I did find it odd I was at a finance seminar in December, and I think it was last December in 22, but nevertheless, there was a presentation by one of the financial consultants, and they were talking about how everyone's assessed value or property tax bills were going up so much %. And, last session, the state General Assembly put all these new laws and parameters in there because everyone was getting killed on their tax bills because AV is going up so much because it's based on home sales and so forth. And people's went up 5, 6, 7%. And so the thought process by default was, well, everyone's AV went up, therefore my circuit breaker loss is going to be less. And in actuality, that did not occur. The AVs went higher, but it all really depends on where that assessment went from. If it was coming from commercial properties, was it coming from homeowners? Because the way our home tax bills are calculated is different than a commercial one. So people were expecting to see their circuit breaker amounts to go down, and they didn't. So that's why I say you think that it might go up, but it really just comes from where's that growth coming from in your base. So
what is the assessed value for Crown Point? Do you have that?
not with me.
Okay.
No.
I was just curious. But you would
We
have
are the highest highest assessed value school district in the county.
But I
do
can
know.
call you and you could give it. No, just.
I have.
Hey,
it.
Rob, nice
So-
job, and boy, I'm glad that you have done your magic with Dr. Bracco and made this the highest assessed value in the county. It's pretty cool.
Well, thank you, but we don't really have anything to do with this. If you want to thank the county assessor, I'll make a call. But
Yeah, we could do that, yeah.
but that's all I have.
But thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Rob.
All right, and we have no public comments, so we'll move right into our board comments and consideration of future agenda items. Mr. Marshall?
I have none myself. Thank you.
Mrs. Kelly?
Congratulations to girls' basketball and good luck.
Yes. Dr. Medlin?
Congratulations to all the great athletes, all the great musical and dance performers and all the scholastic scholars at our district.
Thank you. Dr. Malco?
Right, I think it was a great weekend for a lot of the organizations, and the Science Olympiad team, if you remember when they started years ago, was when they were in the old part of the building, and Mary Jo Martin was in this little tiny room tucked behind the library. But over the years now, they are traveling into Michigan and Illinois for competitions and doing quite well, and it's quite a growth process. And I think that the same is going to happen with robotics. I know we have a new robotics program at the high school that has been moving forward. Dr. Medlin, is it too late for me to get involved with the wellness program since I missed the deadline?
You can keep stepping, sure.
I'll
So
start
if you just
stepping.
put the app on your phone.
I have
Yeah.
to start stepping as well. Okay, thank you.
So the short answer is yes.
And you all have said some really great things, so I echo all that. So with that, we'll move with our board calendar, future activities. Dr. Baraco?
All right, thank you very much. We are back here on Monday, March 4th, unless we have a big crowd. By then, our HVAC should be renovated in the LGI room, so it's being done this week. Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.